For 20 years, single father Jack Mercer believed his wife had died beneath the black water of Alder Lake. He buried an empty future, raised their son alone, and learned to survive one quiet day at a time. Then, on a rain-soaked afternoon at Cedar Falls Station, Jack saw the woman whose name was carved on a gravestone. She was older, frightened, alive, and beside her stood a young woman with Jack's gray eyes. Some losses do not end when the funeral is over. They wait in silence, hidden behind unanswered questions, until the truth returns and demands a price. This is more than a story about a wife who came back from the dead. It is about fatherhood betrayal, lost love, and whether a family broken by 20 years of lies can ever become whole again. Stay until the end. Like the video and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. That impossible moment at Cedar Falls Station did not begin with the rain, the black car across the street, or the young woman staring at Jack with his own gray eyes. It began 20 years earlier on an ordinary summer evening when Jack Mercer still believed ordinary things could last forever. Mercer Classic Motors was little more than a converted feed warehouse back then. The roof leaked near the office, the concrete floor cracked every winter, and the old sign above the entrance had been painted by hand because Jack could not afford a professional one. He loved every inch of it. The garage smelled of warm steel gasoline and the cedar trees that crowded the western edge of town. A radio sat on a shelf beside the workbench, playing an old country song through a layer of static. Jack was bent beneath the hood of a pickup truck, one arm buried deep inside the engine, when a small red toy car rolled between his boots. He looked down. 3-year-old Evan sat cross-legged on the floor, guiding another toy car along a crack in the concrete. Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "Sir, you cannot park there." Evan looked up with Claire's dark eyes and Jack's serious expression. "It broke." "Did it?" Evan nodded gravely. Jack crouched and picked up the toy. "What seems to be the problem?" "The engine is tired." Jack turned the little car over and inspected it with the concentration of a surgeon. "That happens when people drive too fast." "I didn't." "You always say that." The garage door rattled open behind them. Claire Mercer stepped inside, carrying 2 grocery bags against her chest. Sunlight followed her across the floor, turning the loose strands of her dark hair copper at the edges. She looked at Jack, then at Evan, then at the truck that was still missing half its engine parts. "You promised you would be home before dinner." Jack checked the clock on the wall. "I am almost done." Claire raised one eyebrow. "You said that 40 minutes ago." "I was less almost done then." She tried not to smile. Jack took the grocery bags from her and kissed her cheek. Claire leaned into him for half a second longer than usual, as though she needed the weight of him there. He noticed. "What is it?" "Nothing." Jack studied her face. Claire had never been good at lying to him. She touched the edge of her wedding ring whenever she was holding something back. Her thumb was resting against it now. Before he could ask again, Evan tugged at her dress. "Mom, the engine is tired." Claire looked down at the toy car in Jack's hand. "Just like your father." Jack placed a hand over his heart. "I am surrounded by cruelty." Claire laughed, and the sound filled the old garage with something warmer than the evening light. Near the far wall sat a faded 1968 Ford Mustang covered in dust. Jack had bought it from a farmer outside Tacoma for less money than the tires were worth. The body was rusted, the seats were torn, and the engine had not turned over in years. Claire walked toward it and rested one hand on the hood. "You are still keeping this thing. It is a classic. It is a home for mice. Temporary residence. You have owned it for 3 years. Restoration takes patience." Claire looked at him over her shoulder. "When we are old, you will still be working on this car." Jack smiled. "When we are old, you will still be telling me to stop. Somebody has to." He crossed the garage and wrapped an arm around her waist. Evan pressed himself between them, demanding to be included, and Jack lifted him into the space between their bodies. For one quiet moment, the 3 of them stood together beside the unfinished Mustang. Jack would remember that moment for the rest of his life. Not because anything remarkable happened, because nothing did. No one was afraid. No one was missing. No one was measuring time by what had been lost. They were simply a family deciding what to cook for dinner. 3 mornings later, Jack woke before sunrise and found Claire standing alone in the kitchen. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Pale blue light pressed against the windows. Claire wore her robe and held a thick folder against the counter. Jack stopped in the doorway. "You are up early." Claire turned too quickly. The folder snapped shut beneath her hands. Jack saw a silver crown embossed on the cover. Whitmore Global. His expression tightened. Claire noticed. "It is nothing. Your family's version of nothing usually requires attorneys." She lowered her eyes. "My father left some documents that were never properly reviewed. Richard sent them." "No." Jack came closer. Claire moved the folder away from him, not sharply, but deliberately. That frightened him more than if she had hidden it. "What is going on? I am trying to understand something. About the company." "Yes." Jack leaned against the counter. He had never trusted the Whitmore family. Claire had grown up in a stone house above Lake Washington with private schools drivers and dinners where every word had a second meaning. Her father, Charles Whitmore, had built a regional shipping company into an international corporation. Claire had been expected to marry someone with a familiar last name, accept a ceremonial seat on the board, and spend her life smiling beside men who decided things without her. Instead, she married a mechanic from Cedar Falls. The Whitmores had treated Jack politely, which was worse than open contempt. They asked him questions about engines as if speaking to hired help. They praised his work ethic while making it clear that work was something people like them paid others to perform. Claire had walked away from most of it without regret. At least, that was what Jack believed. He touched her arm. "Whatever they want from you, you do not owe them anything." Claire looked at him. There was fear in her eyes, but Jack did not recognize it then. He mistook it for exhaustion. She reached up and placed her palm against his cheek. "I know." "You can tell me. I know that too." He waited. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. From the hallway came the sound of Evan calling for his mother. Claire stepped away. "I will make breakfast." Jack watched her leave the kitchen. The folder remained on the counter. He could have opened it. For years afterward, he would remember that choice. He would remember turning toward the coffee maker instead. He would remember believing that love meant giving someone space to speak when they were ready. That was the last ordinary morning of their marriage. The call came shortly after midnight. Jack had fallen asleep on the couch, waiting for Claire to come home from Seattle. She had said she needed to meet someone connected to her father's estate. The sheriff told him there had been an accident at Alder Lake. Jack drove there in work boots and an unbuttoned shirt, taking the mountain road too quickly. Red emergency lights flashed between the trees before he reached the water. Claire's car had gone through a barrier and down the embankment. By the time Jack arrived, it was burning in the lake. Flames floated across the black surface like pieces of a broken sunset. Fire crews stood waist-deep near the shore. Divers moved through smoke and freezing water. Jack pushed past the barricade. A deputy caught him around the chest. "My wife is in there." "Sir, you cannot go down." "Claire." His voice carried across the lake. No one answered. Jack fought until 2 deputies forced him to his knees in the mud. He stayed there for hours. Rain began before dawn. It ran down his face and soaked through his clothes, but he did not move. Every time a diver surfaced, Jack stood expecting someone to tell him there had been a mistake. There had been no one in the car. Claire had climbed out. She was injured but alive. She was waiting somewhere in the trees. She would appear behind the emergency vehicles and apologize for frightening him. Instead, the divers recovered human remains. The fire had destroyed any possibility of visual identification. Dental records were requested. 2 days later, the county medical examiner confirmed that the body belonged to Claire Mercer. Jack refused to believe it. He demanded another examination. He called hospitals in 3 counties. He drove the shoreline himself, searching abandoned cabins and logging roads. Then the sheriff placed an evidence bag on the table. Inside was Claire's wedding ring. The metal had been darkened by fire, but Jack recognized the thin scratch along the band where she had caught it on the garage door. He stared at it until the room disappeared. At Claire's funeral, the sky opened over Cedar Falls. Black umbrellas filled the cemetery. The Whitmore family stood together near the grave, dressed in tailored coats that made Jack feel as if he had wandered into someone else's life. The coffin remained closed. Jack stood beside it with Evan pressed against his leg. The boy did not understand death. He understood only that everyone kept touching his hair and that his father had forgotten how to speak. When the minister said Claire's name, Evan looked up. "Mom is coming home." Jack closed his eyes. He could not answer. Richard Whitmore approached after the service. He was younger then, though silver had already begun to show at his temples. His coat was perfectly dry beneath an umbrella held by someone else. He placed one hand on Jack's shoulder. Claire always had a reckless side. Jack removed Richard's hand. She was not reckless. Richard's expression barely changed. "Grief changes what we remember." Jack stared at him. There was something wrong in the calmness of Richard's voice, but Jack was too broken to examine it. He took Evan home. That first night, the boy refused to sleep in his own bed. Jack placed him beside him and lay awake until morning, listening to Evan breathe. Every few hours, Evan opened his eyes and asked the same question. "When is Mom coming back?" Jack told him the truth in smaller and smaller pieces until the child finally stopped asking. The months that followed had no shape. Jack learned to cook because Evan needed breakfast. He learned to wash clothes without turning everything gray. He learned which bedtime stories Claire had used and which voices she gave the characters. He learned to sign school forms, pack lunches, remove splinters, and recognize the difference between a tired cry and a frightened one. He also learned that grief did not pause for responsibility. It followed him into the grocery store where he reached for Claire's favorite tea before remembering there was no reason to buy it. It sat beside him during school meetings. It waited inside the passenger seat of his truck. It stood in the kitchen after Evan went to bed, silent and patient. Money became tight. Claire's family offered help, but Jack refused. Richard's attorney sent documents connected to a trust. Jack returned them unopened. He took every repair job he could find. During the day, he worked at the garage. At night, he repaired farm equipment in a shed outside town. There were mornings when Evan found him asleep at the kitchen table with bills beneath his arms. Jack never told the boy how close they came to losing the house. He sold his motorcycle. Then Claire's jewelry, except for the wedding ring, recovered from the lake. Then his father's collection of tools. He did not sell the Mustang. He tried once. A buyer came from Spokane and offered enough money to cover 3 months of mortgage payments. Jack stood beside the car with the title in his hand. Then he remembered Claire leaning against the hood. "When we are old, you will still be working on this car." Jack told the buyer the sale was off. He worked more hours instead. The years moved through small moments. Jack burned pancakes while Evan laughed from the kitchen table. He stayed up until 2 in the morning sewing a cape for a school costume because Claire would have known how to make one. He sat alone in an elementary school auditorium while Evan received a reading award. Every other child ran toward a mother holding flowers. Evan walked toward Jack and pretended not to notice. When Evan was 11, he punched another boy for saying his mother had probably left because she did not love him. The principal called Jack. On the drive home, neither of them spoke. At a stoplight, Jack asked, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Evan stared through the window. He was lying. "Yes. He said she left us." Jack gripped the steering wheel. "She did not leave because of you. You do not know that." The words struck harder than the boy intended. Jack looked at him. Evan's eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. Jack pulled the truck to the side of the road. "Your mother loved you. How do you know?" "Because I saw her love you every day." "Then why is she gone?" Jack had no answer that an 11-year-old could carry. He reached for his son. Evan resisted for half a second, then folded into him. Jack held him until the traffic light changed twice. At 16, Evan stopped visiting the cemetery. Jack continued going every year on the date of Claire's death. He never brought flowers because Claire used to say cut flowers were already dying. Instead, he left smooth stones from Alder Lake. He hated the water, but he kept returning to it. Sometimes he stood near the barrier and imagined the car below him. Sometimes he imagined Claire's final seconds. Sometimes he imagined reaching through the flames and pulling her out. He never imagined she had already escaped. Evan grew into a quiet, observant young man who noticed numbers other people ignored. He could look at a page of expenses and find the one figure that did not belong. He studied accounting in Oregon, then specialized in corporate fraud. Jack joked that his son had become a mechanic for broken companies. Evan did not laugh. He moved to Portland after graduation. He called every Sunday at first, then every other Sunday, then whenever work allowed. Jack never complained. He understood that Evan had spent his entire childhood inside the shadow of a woman he barely remembered. Leaving Cedar Falls was the first choice the boy had made that was not shaped by grief. The morning before Jack went to the station, Evan called while Jack was working beneath the Mustang. Jack placed the phone on the concrete beside him and turned on the speaker. "You still working on that thing?" Evan asked. Jack tightened a bolt. "It is almost ready. You said that when I was 12. It was less ready then." Evan was quiet for a moment. "Have you thought about selling the garage?" Jack slid out from beneath the car. "And do what, retire? I am 49. You work like you are 70. Followed by the sound of many feet moving together. The sound beneath the stage grew clearer as Maya pushed the metal door wider. Not music in the ordinary sense. A heavy rhythm traveled through the floorboards deep enough to be felt through the soles of her shoes. Light flashed somewhere below in measured bursts. Then came the sound of feet landing together. Evelyn stepped past her first. The corridor beyond the door was narrow and dim. Old playbills curled along the walls. Dust lay thick across the stairs, but the handrail had been polished smooth by recent use. Someone had been coming here every day. Maya followed Evelyn down. At the bottom of the staircase, the darkness opened into a rehearsal room. 20 children stood beneath rows of portable lights. Some were deaf. Some could hear. All of them moved together as a woman near the stage signed instructions with quick, precise hands. A boy in a red sweatshirt struck the wooden floor with a padded mallet. Jack stared at the Mustang. "I am not waiting." "Okay." The gentleness in Evan's voice told Jack that his son did not believe him. They said goodbye. Jack remained on the floor beside the car for several minutes after the call ended. By afternoon, rain had begun falling across Cedar Falls. Jack drove to the station to collect a rebuilt transmission shipped from Portland. It was an ordinary errand. He planned to return to the garage, install the part, and eat dinner alone above the sink. Then the crowd near the ticket counter parted. Claire stood beneath the departure board, alive. Beside her stood Grace. And within an hour, Jack was back inside the garage he had built after Claire's death, staring at the woman whose absence had shaped every year of his son's life. Rain struck the roof of the storage building. Grace stood near the unfinished Mustang, her canvas bag still hanging from one shoulder. Claire had removed her wet coat, but she continued trembling. Jack held the photograph she had placed on the workbench. It showed him walking Evan toward school. On the back were the words written in Claire's hand. "I watched from far away." Jack looked at her. "You knew where we were." Claire swallowed. "Yes. And you stayed gone. I believed I was keeping you alive. You watched him grow up through photographs." Her eyes filled. "Yes. You watched me bury you." Claire's voice was almost inaudible. "Yes." Jack placed the photograph on the bench with great care. The control in that movement frightened Grace more than if he had thrown it. Jack stepped away from them. He pressed both hands against the edge of the workbench and lowered his head. "You do not get to call that protection." Claire said nothing. You made me tell our son his mother was dead. You made him grow up believing the last person who ever held him had burned inside a car. I know. No, you know the sentence. You do not know the years." Claire's face folded, but she did not defend herself. Grace moved closer to her mother. Jack saw the movement and stopped. The young woman had lived inside Claire's fear too. Whatever Claire had done to him and Evan Grace had not chosen it. He turned toward the locked door. Headlights moved across the narrow cracks in the metal siding. A vehicle stopped outside. The three of them went silent. A shadow passed in front of the door. The handle turned once, then again. Jack reached for a heavy wrench on the bench. Grace held her breath. Claire whispered, "Do not open it." The shadow remained for several seconds. Then footsteps moved away. An engine started. Jack looked through a gap in the wall and saw dark taillights disappear into the rain. When the sound faded, he turned back toward Claire. "You came here because someone is following you." "Yes." "Who?" Claire picked up the leather folder she had carried from the station. A small silver crown was stamped into its cover. Jack recognized the Whitmore family seal. "Owen Pike helped me disappear," she said. "He arranged the car, the records, and the body they told you was mine." Jack's grip tightened around the wrench. "You expect me to believe one security officer fooled the sheriff, the coroner, and every person standing at that lake?" Claire opened the folder. Inside were old financial statements, photographs, copies of wire transfers, and pages bearing the signature of her dead father. "He did not fool everyone," she said. "He paid some of them." Jack looked down at the documents. Claire placed one finger on a transfer worth $48 million. Then she raised her eyes to his. "Richard bought the rest." Claire's words settled over the garage like smoke. Jack looked down at the papers spread across the workbench. Some carried dates from 20 years earlier. Others showed transfers between companies he had never heard of. Every page bore the same silver crown in the corner. The Whitmore name. A name Claire had once treated like an old coat she could leave hanging by the door. Jack picked up one document. "What am I looking at? Money taken from the employee pension fund." "How much?" Claire hesitated. "More than $300 million. Jack stared at her. Grace leaned against the Mustang, arms folded tightly across her chest. She had heard these numbers before, but watching Jack absorb them made the danger feel newly real. Claire pointed to a list of companies. These businesses existed only on paper. Richard moved pension money through them, then into foreign accounts. My father's signature appears on several of the approvals. Your father was dead." "Yes." Jack turned another page. "So Richard forged it?" Claire nodded. "I found the original accounting records 3 days before I disappeared. I believed I could take them to federal investigators." Jack looked toward the dark window. "And Richard found out. I knew before I finished making copies." Claire reached into the folder and removed a faded photograph. Jack recognized the front porch of their old house. In the picture, he was carrying a sleeping Evan inside. The image had been taken from across the street. Claire placed another photograph beside it. Evan stood in his bedroom wearing dinosaur pajamas. The curtains were partly open. Jack's face changed. "Who took these? I never learned his name." "You had these while we were living there." They were left on the porch in a plain envelope. Jack looked at the photograph of his son, 3 years old, small enough that Jack could still carry him with one arm. Claire spoke softly. There was no note. There did not need to be. Jack set the photograph down. "So you ran. I was going to take you both with me. But you did not." Owen said Richard would search every airport, hospital, hotel, and highway camera in the state. He said 3 people could not disappear quickly enough. Jack gave a bitter laugh. "But one pregnant woman could. I did not know I was pregnant." Grace's eyes lowered. Jack turned toward her. The anger in him shifted. It did not disappear, but it found a boundary. Grace had not made these choices. He looked back at Claire. "When did you find out 9 days after the lake?" The garage faded from Claire's eyes. For a moment she was somewhere else. A roadside motel outside Boise. Brown curtains. A broken ice machine outside the door. A bathroom light that buzzed when she switched it on. Claire sat on the closed toilet lid holding a plastic test in both hands. 2 blue lines. She stared at them until they blurred. Then she laughed. One short sound escaped her before grief crushed it. She covered her mouth and bent forward. Jack was alive. Evan was alive. A new child was growing inside her, and she could not tell either of them. She called Owen Pike from a payphone behind a gas station. He answered after the 7th ring. "I have to go home," she said. His voice remained low. "You cannot. I am pregnant." There was silence on the line. Claire pressed the receiver against her ear. "Owen, if Richard learns there is another heir, he will not stop with Jack and the boy. I cannot do this alone. You do not have to do it alone. Then help me go back. I am helping you stay alive." Claire closed her eyes. "That is not the same thing." "No," Owen said. "It is the only thing I can guarantee." He gave her an address in Montana and told her to leave Boise before sunrise. Claire boarded a bus under the name Rebecca Hale. She carried one suitcase, the financial records, and a photograph of Jack holding Evan on his shoulders. For the first 4 months, she lived in a farmhouse outside Missoula with a retired nurse who owed Owen a favor. The woman never asked Claire's real name. She called her Becca and taught her how to sleep through the sound of cars slowing near the house. When Grace was born, snow covered the fields. The rural clinic had 6 rooms and 1 doctor. Claire used false identification. She signed the name Rebecca Hale on every form. The nurse placed the baby against her chest. Grace opened her eyes. Storm gray, the exact color of Jack's. Claire began crying before the child made a sound. She whispered, "Your father would know you." Years later, Grace would remember her mother's fear as a series of rules. Never stand near the front window after dark. Never tell classmates where they lived before. Never allow school pictures to be posted online. Never give the same answer twice when strangers asked where her father came from. Never become too attached to a place. They moved from Montana to North Dakota, then to Minnesota, then east toward Maine. Sometimes they stayed for 2 years. Sometimes they left after 2 weeks. Claire worked wherever no one asked many questions. She kept books for a fishing company. She cleaned rooms at a roadside hotel. She handled invoices for a hardware store whose owner believed she was a widow from Vermont. Grace attended 7 schools before the age of 13. She stopped decorating her bedroom because boxes were easier to pack when walls stayed empty. Every move began the same way. Claire entered Grace's room after midnight. "Get dressed." Grace would sit up. "Are we in danger?" Claire always answered, "Not if we leave now." Once in a small town near Duluth, Grace had joined a school choir. She loved singing. For the first time, Claire allowed her to remain after school for rehearsals. 3 days before the winter concert, Claire saw a black sedan parked across from their apartment. The same sedan appeared the next morning outside the grocery store. That night, Claire packed their clothes. Grace stood beside the suitcase in her choir uniform. "The concert is tomorrow. I know. You promised. I know. You always promise right before we leave." Claire stopped folding a sweater. Grace was 12, then old enough to understand that fear could be inherited even when the truth was not. "Who are we hiding from?" she asked. Claire continued packing. "Someone who hurt our family." "What family?" Claire froze. Grace's voice sharpened. "You say we have family, but I have never met any of them." Claire looked at her daughter. There were moments when Grace's face seemed entirely her own. Then she narrowed her eyes or pressed 2 fingers against a table and Jack appeared inside her. Claire wanted to tell her everything. Instead, she said, "Your father died before you were born." Grace looked toward the packed suitcase. "Did he know about me? No. Would he have wanted me?" Claire could not answer immediately. Grace mistook the silence. She turned away before her mother could see her crying. Claire crossed the room and held her from behind. He would have loved you before he knew your name. Grace remained stiff in her arms. Then why do you never talk about him? Because missing him makes it difficult to breathe. It was the closest Claire came to the truth for many years. Back inside the garage, Grace stared at Jack. My whole life she told me my father died before I was born. Jack did not know what expression belonged on his face. He had imagined many conversations with children over the years. He had explained death to Evan heartbreak after Evan's first relationship, the fear of leaving home for college. He had never imagined meeting a daughter who had already learned how to live without him. What did she tell you about me? He asked. Grace looked at Claire. Not much, Claire said. No. He asked me. Grace faced Jack again. She said you were kind. She said you fixed things. She said you laughed with your whole face. Jack glanced away. Grace continued. She said you never knew I existed. That part was true. She said if you had known you would have loved me. Jack looked at her then. Claire held her breath. Grace's expression remained guarded, but beneath it was something younger. A question she had carried since childhood. Jack answered carefully. She was right about that too. Grace's mouth tightened. She turned toward the Mustang before emotion could reach her face. Jack saw her press 2 fingers against the car's hood. Tap. Tap. The same rhythm he used against the steering wheel. The same rhythm Evan used against the dinner table before difficult conversations. Jack felt something shift inside him. It was not certainty. It was recognition. Claire returned the photographs to the folder. Owen sent me pictures of you and Evan for years. Jack's attention snapped back to her. How I do not know. You never asked, I asked every time. And he never answered. He said the less I knew, the safer you were. Jack began walking slowly across the garage. How long did he contact you? Almost 7 years. What happened after that? He disappeared. Just disappeared. Every phone number stopped working. Every address he used was empty. The last message I received told me to stay where I was and wait. For 13 years, Claire flinched. No. That is what you did. I wrote to you. Letters I never received. I sent them through Owen at first. After he vanished, I tried ordinary mail. Jack stopped. Claire reached into the bottom of her bag and removed a bundle tied with faded string. Dozens of envelopes. Some were yellowed, some were unopened. Most carried Jack's name. Grace looked at them. You kept those? These are the copies. Jack stared at the bundle. You copied every letter. I needed proof that I had tried. The words left Claire before she understood how they sounded. Jack's eyes hardened. Proof for who? Claire had no answer. Grace looked away. Claire placed the letters on the bench. At first, every attempt felt dangerous. Then, more years passed. Evan grew older. You built a life. I no longer knew whether coming back would save anything or destroy whatever remained. You made that choice for us. Yes. You decided we were better without the truth. Yes. Jack's voice dropped. You do not get to turn fear into sacrifice and expect me to thank you. I do not. Then what do you expect? Claire looked at him. Nothing. The honesty stopped him. She continued. I did not come here expecting forgiveness. I came because Grace is in danger, and because the reason I disappeared is about to become the reason Richard comes after her. Grace stepped away from the Mustang. You still have not explained why tomorrow matters. Claire removed a thick legal document from the folder. The first page carried the name of her father. Charles Whitmore Family Voting Trust. She spread it across the workbench. My father created this trust before his final surgery. He wanted the company protected from anyone who might use it as a private bank. Jack looked at the signatures. Richard. He never trusted Richard with permanent control. Claire pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. 51% of the voting shares remained in the trust. Richard was appointed temporary steward only if I died without a legitimate biological heir. Grace stared at the document. I am the heir. Yes. Then why has he controlled the company all this time? Because legally, I am dead. Legally, you do not exist as my daughter. Grace's face tightened. I exist. I know. That is not what you said. Claire reached toward her. Grace stepped back. Jack watched the space open between them. Claire lowered her hand. I mean, the trust has no record of you, because you gave me a false name. Yes. Grace looked at the document again. What happens when I turn 21? Claire pointed to another clause. The voting shares transfer to my biological child, automatically if paternity and lineage are established. Jack frowned. Why paternity? My father knew Richard might challenge any child I had outside the Whitmore family's control. The trust requires proof from both biological parents. Grace looked at Jack. So without him, I cannot claim it. Claire nodded. There is more. She turned the page. The transfer also triggers an independent audit of the pension fund and every company connected to it. Jack understood. That is what Richard is afraid of. He is finalizing the sale of Whitmore Global's shipping and energy divisions to an overseas investment group. The vote is scheduled for tomorrow evening, before Grace's birthday. Yes. If the sale closes, the money moves beyond the reach of the trust. The shell companies dissolve. Records disappear. Grace read the clause again. She had spent her life believing she owned nothing permanent. Not a home, not a name, not even a true history. Now she was being told that by midnight tomorrow she could control a company worth billions. She stepped away from the table. I do not want it. Claire followed her with her eyes. You do not have to run the company. I do not want the money. It is not about the money. It is always about the money with your family. Grace looked at Jack. I found out 2 weeks ago that my father was alive. Now I am supposed to prove it in time to inherit a corporation from people I have never met. Jack saw the panic beneath her anger. You do not have to decide anything tonight, Claire said. She does not have time. Jack turned toward her. She has had 20 years of decisions made for her. Give her 1 hour. Claire fell silent. Grace looked at Jack with surprise. He did not smile. He simply pulled an old wooden chair away from the workbench. You can sit, or walk outside, or yell at both of us. Nobody here gets to decide that for you. Grace sat, slowly. Jack remained standing between her and Claire without realizing it. Claire noticed. For the first time in Grace's life, someone was protecting her from Claire's urgency. Not because Claire was cruel, because fear had made her forget that protection without choice could become another kind of prison. Grace looked at the trust. Whereas the original Claire's expression changed. Owen hid it. Where I received a recording 3 days ago from a lawyer handling his estate. Jack frowned. You said he disappeared. He lived under another name. He died 6 months ago in Arizona. Natural causes. The lawyer would not say. Claire took out her phone and opened an audio file. Owen Pike's voice filled the garage. It was older than Jack remembered, roughened by age and fatigue. Claire, if you are hearing this, Richard has begun moving the company assets. That means he knows the trust can still be enforced. The original clause is safe, but not where he expects. I placed it inside something you gave Jack when he opened his garage. He kept it because he keeps what matters even when it hurts him. The recording ended. Jack looked toward the office. Claire followed his gaze. The tool chest. It sat beneath the window exactly where it had rested for 2 decades. Claire had made it from walnut with her own hands. The joints were uneven and one drawer had never closed properly. Jack had refused every suggestion to replace it. He crossed the garage. Grace and Claire followed. The office door stood partly open. Jack stopped. He knew he had locked it before leaving for the station. He pushed the door wider. Files covered the floor. Desk drawers had been pulled out. The cabinet where he kept customer records hung open. The old tool chest sat in the corner. Its brass lock had been broken. Jack approached slowly. He opened the top. Wrenches and sockets remained inside, but every drawer had been searched. Claire looked toward the wall. Her breath caught. Someone had written a sentence in black paint above Jack's desk. Dead women should remain dead. Grace took one step backward. Jack immediately moved in front of her. He raised the wrench still in his hand and checked the storage room, the bathroom, and the back exit. No one remained inside. Claire touched the painted words. They know. Jack looked at the broken lock. Did Richard know Owen hid something here? He should not have. Then someone heard you. Claire looked toward the security camera above the garage entrance. Jack followed her gaze. The small light was dark. The cable had been cut. Grace whispered, "The car at the station." Jack took out his phone. Claire caught his wrist. "You cannot call the police. This is my business. Richard controls people in the county. You have said that about hospitals, banks, and courts. Is there anyone he does not control?" "Yes." "Who?" Claire looked toward Cedar Falls through the rain-streaked window. "People he believes are too small to matter." Jack called Amanda Reyes. She had known him since high school and handled the legal work when he opened the garage. She answered on the second ring. "If this is about the unpaid invoice, I have already decided to become unreasonable. Can you come to the garage?" "What happened?" Jack looked at Claire. Grace, the broken chest, and the threat painted across the wall. "My dead wife came home." Amanda said nothing. "She brought my daughter." Still nothing. "And somebody broke in looking for a trust document worth control of Whitmore Global." Amanda finally spoke. "Are you drinking? No. Do you need the police? I need a lawyer. I am both disappointed and curious. I am leaving now." Amanda arrived 20 minutes later wearing a navy suit beneath a raincoat. Reading glasses rested on top of her head, and she carried a leather briefcase in one hand. In the other she carried a tire iron. Jack looked at it. "What is that for?" "You said dead wife, secret daughter, and corporate conspiracy in one phone call." She stepped inside. "I made an educated decision." Amanda stopped when she saw Claire. She had attended the funeral. For several seconds, the only sound was rain striking the roof. Amanda removed her glasses. "Well," she said, "that is definitely Claire." Claire gave a tired smile. "Hello, Amanda. I cried at your grave. I am sorry. I wore expensive shoes in mud. I am especially sorry about that." Amanda's face softened for only a moment. Then she looked at Grace. Grace straightened. Amanda saw Jack's eyes in her face. "Oh," she said quietly. Jack handed her the trust copy. Amanda read, standing beside the workbench. She turned pages twice, then returned to the first clause. "Where did you get this?" "My father's private files," Claire said. "Is it complete?" "As far as I know." "Original, no." Amanda looked up. "That is a problem." "How large a problem?" Jack asked. "The kind involving 30 attorneys who bill more in 1 hour than you earn rebuilding an engine." She placed the copy flat. "The clause appears enforceable, but Richard's lawyers will attack everything. Claire's identity, Grace's identity, the date of execution, the witnesses, the paternity, the chain of custody." Grace looked at her. "Can we prove any of it?" "Yes." Amanda's answer was immediate, but not with stories. She began counting on her fingers. "We need the original trust. We need a court-recognized test establishing that Jack is your biological father. We need evidence Claire is alive and connected to the trust. We need someone who can trace the financial structure Richard used." Jack already knew where she was going. "No." Amanda looked at him. "You have not heard the name yet. You mean Evan. He is a forensic accountant. He is my son. He is also Claire's son." Jack stepped closer. "He has spent 20 years learning to live without her." Amanda's voice remained calm. "He is about to learn she allowed him to." Claire lowered her eyes. Jack turned away. Grace watched him. "He deserves to know," she said. Jack looked at her. The words did not sound accusing. They sounded tired. Grace continued. "You said nobody here gets to make choices for me. Maybe you cannot make this one for him." Jack stood motionless. Then he took out his phone. Evan arrived the following morning. He drove through 3 hours of rain from Portland, fully convinced someone had manipulated his father. He entered the garage carrying a laptop bag and anger held behind professional calm. Jack waited near the office. Evan looked at him. "Where are they?" Jack did not ask how much he believed. He led him into the storage building. Claire stood beside the workbench. Grace remained near the Mustang. Evan stopped. His bag slipped from his shoulder and struck the floor. Claire said his name. "Evan." His face changed, not into recognition, into the collapse of certainty. He had seen Claire only in photographs. A wedding portrait, a picture of her holding him as an infant, a faded image taken beside the Mustang. The woman before him was older, but the eyes were the same. The curve of her mouth was the same. Evan stared at her as if waiting for the resemblance to break. It did not. Claire took one step forward. Evan raised a hand. "Do not." She stopped. Jack remained near the door. Grace watched her brother. Evan's voice was controlled. "Where were you?" Claire opened her mouth. "No," he said. "Do not start with danger. Do not start with Richard. Tell me where you were when Dad worked nights fixing farm equipment because the mortgage was late." Claire's eyes filled. "I was hiding." "Where were you when I waited outside school for 2 hours because he fell asleep at the garage I did not know? Where were you when I graduated in Maine?" The answer surprised him. Claire continued because he had asked for the truth. "I stood behind a seafood restaurant and watched the ceremony on a live stream someone sent me." Evan laughed once. There was no humor in it. "You watched?" "Yes." "You watched him raise me?" "Yes." "You watched us bury you?" Claire's voice broke. "Yes." Evan looked at Jack. For the first time he saw not only his father's grief, but the humiliation inside it. Jack had spent 20 years honoring a woman who had known he was alive. Evan turned back toward Claire. "He learned how to be 2 parents. You learned how to disappear." Claire did not defend herself. "I am sorry." Evelyn signed something. Damien frowned. "What did she say?" Maya waited for Evelyn's permission. "She said your coffee tastes like evidence." "That does not make sense. It means it should be sealed in a plastic bag and kept away from the public." Evelyn laughed. Damien looked at the cup he was holding. "You both drank it yesterday. We were building a case. We accepted the risk." The room softened. For the next hour, Maya worked with Rachel to reconstruct the theater's financial history. Checks had been issued to companies with different names but identical mailing addresses. Several invoices used the same spelling errors. Repair costs increased every time attendance reports were removed from the foundation system. Evelyn compared the invoices with the building plans. She found a certificate claiming that new steel supports had been installed beneath the balcony. The original drawings showed the exact dimensions of the support cavities. If the work had been completed, the plaster walls would have been opened and rebuilt. They had not been touched in decades. Rachel brought an old maintenance photograph. The crack near the balcony rail was visible in the same location 4 years earlier. Evelyn placed the photograph beside the recent inspection report. Same wall, same crack. No reinforcement. Maya watched her work. This was not suspicion. It was expertise. Victor had counted on people seeing a deaf woman before they saw an architect. That mistake was beginning to cost him. Damien stood near the doorway, speaking quietly with his security chief, Anthony Cole. Anthony handed him a phone. Damien listened without expression. When the call ended, he told Evelyn that Victor had booked a private flight from a regional airport outside the city. Evelyn signed, "When tomorrow night, after the public meeting." Maya looked toward Damien. "Can you stop him without touching him? I can stop a plane." That was not the question. Grace looked at the pocket watch resting in Jack's palm. Claire stood beside her, close enough to touch, but careful not to. Evan closed the false panel and looked around the garage. The broken lock, the cut camera cable, the threat painted on the wall. Someone had entered believing the document was inside the chest. Someone had failed to find the hidden compartment. For the first time since arriving, Evan looked at Claire without anger controlling every part of his face. "Whoever searched this place is going to learn we found something." Claire nodded. "They probably already know." Outside, rainwater flowed along the curb in silver streams. Amanda submitted the emergency motion from the office. Jack locked the pocket watch inside the garage safe. Grace sat near the Mustang, watching him turn the dial. Evan stood beside the broken tool chest. The 4 members of the Mercer family occupied the same room for the first time in 20 years. None of them knew how to speak to one another, but none of them left. By sunset, the bank order had been filed, and Richard Whitmore learned that the family he had divided was finally standing in one place. By sunrise, Richard Whitmore had already begun to move. The first news report appeared before Jack opened the garage. A photograph from Cedar Falls Station filled the television screen. Jack stood in the rain beside Claire, his face caught between shock and anger. Grace was visible behind them, one hand raised to shield herself from the camera. The reporter called Claire an unidentified woman claiming to be the deceased Whitmore heiress. Jack was described as a financially troubled mechanic with possible ties to an attempted inheritance scheme. No one mentioned the broken lock at the garage. No one mentioned the threat painted on the wall. No one asked how the photograph had been taken before Jack told anyone Claire was alive. Customers began calling before 7. A man from Spokane canceled a restoration contract worth 6 months of payroll. A local contractor asked Jack to return a deposit. Another customer did not call at all. He simply sent a tow truck to remove his car. Jack watched the empty spaces appear across the garage floor. Grace stood near the office television. "This is because of us." Jack turned off the screen. "This is because of him. If we had not come here, your business would still be safe." Jack looked at her. "You did not break into my office. You did not call the reporters. You did not spend 20 years stealing from people." Grace lowered her eyes. Jack softened his voice. "Do not carry another man's guilt just because he placed it in your hands." Claire stood behind them silent. The words were meant for Grace, but they reached her too. At 9 that morning, Jack's bank called to inform him that his business credit line was under review. The woman on the phone spoke with practiced politeness, repeating the phrase "unusual financial activity" without explaining what activity she meant. At 10, 2 county deputies arrived with a search warrant. Amanda read it twice. "Anonymous information," she said. "They claim Jack possesses corporate records stolen from Whitmore Global." One deputy looked uncomfortable. The other did not. They opened cabinets, searched toolboxes, and photographed every document bearing the Whitmore seal. Jack remained beside the Mustang with his arms folded. Evan filmed the search on his phone. Grace watched officers pull apart the office Jack had rebuilt with his own hands. Claire approached the senior deputy, who requested this warrant. The man looked at her as if she were a ghost who had spoken. "Ma'am, step back. My name is Claire Whitmore Mercer. According to the state, Claire Mercer has been dead for 20 years. Claire held his gaze. "Then the state has made a serious mistake." The deputy looked away first. When the search ended, the officers carried away 2 boxes of copied financial records. They did not take the pocket watch. Amanda had already placed it in a bank vault registered under her law firm. The moment the police left, a black sedan turned into the garage lot. Richard Whitmore stepped out alone. He wore a charcoal coat and dark leather gloves. Rain had stopped, but the sky remained low and gray above Cedar Falls. Jack met him at the entrance. "You are not welcome here." Richard looked past him at the half-empty garage. "It appears fewer people are welcome here than yesterday." Jack did not move. Richard walked inside anyway. His polished shoes clicked across the concrete. Claire emerged from the office. For the first time in 20 years, uncle and niece stood within the same room. Richard studied her face. "You have aged," Claire answered. "You have not changed. That is rarely meant as praise." It was not. Richard looked toward Grace. Something passed through his expression, too quick for anyone except Jack to notice. Recognition, not surprise. Richard already knew her. He turned back to Jack. "I came to offer a practical solution." Jack laughed quietly. "You sent police into my garage. I did no such thing. You put my face on television. The press has an appetite for spectacle. You fed them." Richard removed one glove. "Perhaps. But the facts remain. Your business is collapsing. Your accounts are under review. Your son's career may soon attract attention from regulators who dislike unauthorized access to corporate records." Evan stepped forward. "Threatening me in front of a lawyer is careless." Richard glanced at Amanda. "I see only an attorney who has not yet realized how expensive this mistake will become." Amanda smiled. "I charge more when people try to frighten me." Richard returned his attention to Jack. $25 million. The number silenced the garage. Jack's expression did not change. "For what?" "A statement." Richard removed an envelope from his coat and placed it on the nearest workbench. "You will declare that the woman calling herself Claire Mercer approached you with a fabricated story. You will state that Grace Hart is not your daughter and that you have no intention of supporting any claim against the Whitmore Trust." Grace stiffened at the sound of her legal name. Only Claire, Jack, Evan, and Amanda knew it. Richard continued as though he had not made a mistake. "The money will be transferred to an account of your choosing. Your business debts will disappear. Your son will remain untouched. You can return to the life you had before this woman came back." Jack stared at the envelope. For one brief moment he imagined signing. Not because he wanted the money, because Claire had watched him struggle from a distance. She had known about the unpaid bills, the double shifts, and the nights Evan waited for a mother who never returned. $25 million could become a punishment. It could be the price Claire paid for believing Jack's grief was necessary. Richard saw the hesitation. "She abandoned you," he said softly. "I am offering compensation for what she stole." Claire did not defend herself. That made the temptation worse. Richard stepped closer. "You owe her nothing." Jack looked at Grace. She stood beside the Mustang trying to appear unaffected. Her fingers tapped twice against the metal. Jack saw the frightened child beneath the young woman. He looked at Evan. His son had spent 20 years carrying questions no money could answer. Then Jack looked at Richard. "I may owe Claire nothing." Claire flinched. Jack continued. "But I owe my children the truth." Richard's expression cooled. "Grace Hart is not your child until a court says she is." Jack stepped closer. "How do you know her full name?" Richard said nothing. "You called her Grace Hart. We never released that name." A small muscle tightened in Richard's jaw. Jack lowered his voice. "How long have you been watching her?" Richard put his glove back on. "Take the offer, Jack. Get out." Richard left the envelope on the workbench. Jack picked it up and threw it into a metal waste barrel. Evan struck a match. The paper curled into flame. Richard watched from the doorway. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The paternity test was arranged that afternoon. Amanda refused to use a laboratory in Washington. She drove Jack and Grace across the state line to a private clinic in Oregon that specialized in court-admissible testing. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and coffee. Jack sat beside Grace beneath a painting of a mountain lake. Neither spoke for several minutes. Grace finally asked, "Do you think I am lying?" Jack looked at her. "No." "Do you think she is?" "I think your mother has told the truth and hidden the truth in the same sentence for 20 years. Grace folded her hands. "That is not an answer." "No." "Then what do you think?" Jack studied her face. "I think you have my eyes. I think you tap your fingers like Evan." I think the first time I saw you, something inside me recognized you before my mind could. Grace looked down. Jack continued. But I also know what believing without proof cost me once. She nodded slowly. That is fair. The results arrived the following evening. Grace opened the envelope alone in Jack's office. Jack remained near the door. Probability of paternity exceeded every legal threshold. The words were cold and clinical. Grace read them twice. Does this change anything? Jack answered carefully. It changes what I know. Not what you feel. I do not know you yet. Pain moved across her face before she could hide it. Jack stepped closer. But I want to. Grace looked at him. He did not call her his daughter. She did not call him her father. Still, neither looked away. That night, Richard sent Grace a message. He attached scanned government documents showing that Claire had once been offered entry into a federal witness protection program. Grace read the message 3 times. Your mother had a lawful path home. She chose not to take it. Grace left the garage before dawn without telling anyone. She met Richard at the Whitmore Grand Hotel in Seattle. The lobby was built to make ordinary people lower their voices. Marble floors reflected gold chandeliers. Oil portraits of the Whitmore family lined the walls. Grace paused beneath one of Charles Whitmore, her grandfather. She saw her own eyes in his face. Richard waited in a private lounge. He rose when she entered. You look like Claire did at your age. Grace did not sit. You knew who I was. I suspected. For how long? Several years. And you did nothing. Richard poured coffee. Your mother had made herself difficult to locate. You found me. I found traces. Grace placed the witness protection documents on the table. Are these real? Yes. Why did she refuse? Richard looked almost sympathetic. Because your mother has always preferred control to trust. You tried to kill her. Richard's expression remained calm. That is what she told you. She showed us the photographs. Photographs prove she was watched. Powerful families watch people for many reasons. Grace leaned closer. What reason did you have to watch a 3-year-old sleeping? For the first time, Richard looked irritated. He recovered quickly. You should verify everything. That is more than your mother ever allowed you to do. His words followed Grace all the way back to Cedar Falls. She entered the garage and threw the documents onto the workbench. Claire read the first page. Her face changed. You met him. Answer the question. Jack and Evan remained near the office. Grace pointed to the government seal. You had protection. Claire closed the file. I had an offer. You could have accepted it. The official handling my case had already contacted a Whitmore attorney twice. Did you prove he was compromised? No. So you ran because you were suspicious. I ran because one mistake would have killed you. Grace's voice rose. Was it danger, or were you afraid? Claire looked at her daughter. Both. You told me we had no choice. At first we did not. And later, Claire's silence filled the garage. Jack watched her struggle. He did not rescue her. Grace stepped closer. Were you protecting me, or were you protecting yourself from coming back? Claire's eyes filled. The first years were fear. Grace waited. After that, Claire continued. I no longer knew how to stand in front of the people I had hurt. Jack's voice was quiet. So you kept hurting them because you were afraid to see the damage. Claire looked at him. Yes. No excuse followed. Grace turned away, pressing both hands against the workbench. Evan left the room without speaking. He returned several hours later carrying a cardboard archive box. He placed it before Claire. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Every envelope bore Jack's name or Evan's. Evan had traced Owen Pike's old security accounts to a storage facility owned by a Whitmore subsidiary. Claire's letters had been redirected there for years. Richard had intercepted every attempt she made to contact them. Evan lifted one envelope. It was dated on his 10th birthday. Another was dated the night he graduated. The final letter had been written 1 week before Owen disappeared. Evan opened it and read aloud. I am coming home. If fear follows me, then I will face it at the door." His voice weakened on the final word. Claire stood motionless. "You tried," he said. She nodded. "Not hard enough." Evan looked at her for a long time. "No, not hard enough." He left the letters on the table. It was not forgiveness, but he did not walk away from the family. Amanda's investigation led her to Dr. Nora Bell, the former medical examiner who had approved Claire's identification. Nora lived outside Olympia in a small house surrounded by fir trees. She served coffee she did not drink. Her hands shook as she admitted that Claire's dental records had been replaced by her supervisor before the examination. The body had been too badly burned for visual identification. No DNA test had been ordered. The Whitmore attorneys wanted the case closed, Nora said. "My supervisor told me the family needed privacy," Amanda asked. "Whose body was it?" Nora looked toward the window. "I do not know." She remembered one detail. The woman had a healed fracture in her left wrist. Evan searched missing person records and found a possible match. A 28-year-old accounting assistant named Rachel Mason had disappeared 2 days before Claire's car entered Alder Lake. Rachel worked for a company later exposed as one of Richard's shell corporations. Claire stared at the photograph on Evan's screen. Richard's crimes were no longer limited to money. Nora agreed to sign a sworn statement and testify if Amanda secured legal protection. With the paternity result, Nora's confession, and the trust copy, Amanda convinced a judge to open the frozen safety deposit box. They entered Pacific Meridian Bank with less than 12 hours remaining before Grace's birthday. A bank officer placed the long metal box on a private table. Jack inserted Owen's brass key. The lock opened. Inside was an empty envelope. Nothing else. Grace stared into the box. Claire gripped the edge of the table. Amanda searched the interior twice. Evan noticed a photograph beneath the envelope. It showed Peter Lang, Whitmore Global's chief financial officer, removing a file from that same box 10 years earlier. Grace whispered. He took it. Amanda checked the time. Richard's emergency board meeting would begin that evening. Jack looked at the empty box. "We are too late." Evan studied the photograph. Peter was facing the security camera directly. He was not hiding. He was holding the document where the lens could see it. Evan turned the image toward Amanda. "No," Evan said. He wanted someone to know he took it. The photograph lay on the bank table between them. Peter Lang stood inside the vault 10 years earlier, holding the missing file in both hands. His face was turned directly toward the security camera. He was not rushing. He was not shielding the document beneath his coat. He was making certain the camera saw him. Amanda examined the photograph again. If Peter wanted to steal the trust for Richard, he would have avoided the lens. Claire looked toward the empty deposit box, unless he believed Richard already controlled the footage. Evan shook his head. Then there would be no reason to hold the file like that. Jack watched his son enlarge the image on his laptop. Peter's expression was tense. Behind him, barely visible in the polished metal of the vault wall, was the reflection of another man. Evan sharpened the image. The reflection remained blurred, but a dark overcoat and silver hair could be seen. Claire leaned closer. "Owen." Amanda looked at her. "You are sure I knew the way he stood?" His right shoulder was lower after an injury in the Marines. Jack studied the reflection. "So Owen told Peter to take the document." "That is what it looks like," Evan said. Grace stood at the end of the table, her hands wrapped around the back of a chair. Then Peter might still have it. Amanda checked her watch. The Whitmore board meeting would begin in less than 4 hours. "We need to find him before Richard does." Evan searched through corporate records. Peter's public schedule showed no meetings that day. His office assistant claimed he had not appeared at Whitmore Tower since the previous evening. Jack asked. "Where does he live?" "Bellevue," Evan said. But if he knew this was coming, he would not go home. Claire looked at Peter's face in the photograph. "He worked for my father before Richard took control." "Did you trust him?" Grace asked. "My father did." "That is not what I asked." Claire met her daughter's eyes. I never knew him well enough to decide. Grace glanced toward the vault door. That seems to be how this family operates. No one argued. Amanda called Peter's office twice. Both calls went to voicemail. Evan searched property records, vehicle registrations, and corporate travel accounts. Peter owned a condo in Bellevue and a vacation cabin near Cle Elum. His company car had entered the Whitmore Tower garage shortly after 6 that morning and had not left. He is already there, Evan said. Amanda closed the empty deposit box. Then we go to him. The drive from the bank to Seattle took less than an hour, but time seemed to stretch inside Jack's truck. Dark clouds pressed against the city skyline. Traffic moved slowly across wet streets. The towers of downtown Seattle rose ahead of them, reflecting a sky the color of steel. Jack drove with both hands on the wheel. Claire sat beside him. Evan and Grace sat in the back. It was the first time the four of them had occupied the same vehicle. No one spoke for several miles. Grace watched Jack through the rearview mirror. He still wore the dark suit Amanda had made him buy for the court appearance. The jacket fit poorly across his shoulders. His hands looked too rough against the polished steering wheel. Claire kept her eyes on the city. When they passed a sign for Lake Washington, she looked down. Jack noticed. "You do not have to go inside." Claire turned toward him. "Yes, I do. I meant legally. Amanda can present the statement." This began with my silence. Jack's jaw tightened. It began with Richard. It continued because of me. Evan looked out the side window. Claire continued. "If I stay outside now, he will use that against Grace. He will say I am afraid to be questioned." Grace spoke from the back. "Are you?" Claire answered without turning. "Yes." The honesty quieted the truck. They entered downtown as evening light faded behind the buildings. Whitmore Tower stood near the waterfront, 40 stories of glass and black stone. The company name shone above the entrance in silver letters. Jack parked across the street. For a moment, none of them moved. Grace stared up at the building. She had spent her childhood sleeping in rented rooms, keeping her life inside boxes that could be carried before sunrise. Now she was looking at a tower built partly in her name. Jack switched off the engine. "Do you want to do this?" Grace kept watching the building. "No." Jack nodded. "Neither do I." She looked at him. He opened the door. "That does not mean we let him decide." Rain had begun again when they crossed the street. Amanda waited beneath the covered entrance with Dr. Nora Bell. Nora wore a plain gray coat and held a folder against her chest. Her face was pale, but she did not leave when Richard's security officers looked toward her. 2 federal agents stood farther down the block inside an unmarked car. Amanda had given them Peter's name, Nora's statement, and the financial records Evan recovered. They did not yet have enough for an arrest. They were waiting for the board meeting. Amanda stepped toward Jack. Richard moved the vote forward by 30 minutes. "How much time do we have?" Grace asked. 2 hours and 17 minutes until midnight. They entered the lobby. The interior was quiet, despite the storm outside. White marble stretched beneath a ceiling 3 stories high. A silver sculpture of a crown stood near the reception desk. Claire stopped just inside the doors. The last time she had entered Whitmore Tower, her father had still been alive. She had been 27 and angry because he wanted her to accept a board position. She had told him she wanted a life that belonged to her. Now her reflection appeared in the marble beside Grace's. 2 women carrying names that had been hidden from them in different ways. A security officer approached. "May I see identification?" Amanda presented her credentials and the court filings. The officer scanned the documents. Then he looked at Claire. "This identification is invalid." Claire said, "It is mine. The state record lists Claire Whitmore Mercer as deceased." "I am aware. You cannot enter the restricted floors without valid identification." Amanda opened Nora's sworn statement. "This document establishes credible evidence that the death record resulted from falsified medical records. It does not restore her identity. It is enough to prevent you from treating her as a trespasser in a company where she holds a disputed ownership claim." The officer looked toward the elevators. 3 more security guards moved into position. Jack stepped beside Claire. Evan stood beside Grace. For several tense seconds, the family faced a wall of dark suits. The elevator doors opened. Richard stepped into the lobby. He wore a black suit and silver tie. Board members followed behind him, speaking quietly until they noticed Claire. Richard smiled. It was a controlled expression meant for cameras and shareholders. Claire. She held his gaze. Richard. Several board members stopped. A woman near the elevator whispered Claire's name. Richard walked toward them. You have brought quite an audience. Amanda raised Nora's statement. We are requesting that the board delay any vote until Claire's identity and Grace's claim can be reviewed. Richard glanced at Grace. You mean Miss Hart? Grace did not react. Richard looked at Jack. You have brought your entire tragedy into my building. Jack answered. No, we brought yours. The board members heard him. Richard's smile faded slightly. He turned toward the security officer. Allow them upstairs. Amanda narrowed her eyes. That was easier than expected. Richard looked back at her. I have nothing to fear from a story that cannot survive examination. The elevator carried them to the 38th floor. The boardroom overlooked Elliott Bay. Rain moved across the windows in silver sheets. A long table of dark wood filled the center of the room. Each chair had a small brass nameplate. At the head of the table sat an empty seat beneath a portrait of Charles Whitmore. Grace looked at the portrait. Her grandfather's expression was stern, but his gray eyes resembled hers. Richard noticed. He built everything you see, Grace answered. And you stole from the people who built it for him. Richard's mouth tightened. The board members entered one by one. Some recognized Claire immediately. Others stared at Grace. Most avoided Jack. He could feel their judgment before anyone spoke. To them, he was a mechanic in a borrowed suit standing in a room designed to remind men like him that they did not belong. Jack looked toward the city below. From that height, Cedar Falls seemed impossibly far away. Richard approached Grace while Amanda arranged her documents. May I speak with you privately? Grace looked at Claire, then at Jack. Jack did not tell her what to do. Grace nodded and followed Richard toward the far windows. He kept his voice low. You are about to enter a conflict you do not understand. I understand enough. You understand what your mother wants you to believe. Grace looked toward Claire. She has lied to me. Richard appeared pleased. At least we agree on something. That does not make you honest. Richard studied her. You are intelligent. That comes from your grandfather. My father is standing across the room. Richard glanced at Jack. Your father repairs old cars. Charles Whitmore built industries. Grace's expression hardened. My father raised a son alone while you watched him struggle. Richard did not respond immediately. He looked toward the board table. If you press this claim, every part of your life becomes public. Your school records, your mother's false identities, your medical history, every place you ever lived. You already know those things. I know enough to warn you. You mean threaten me. Richard lowered his voice further. I am offering you a way out. He removed a folded document from his jacket. A settlement. $50 million placed into an independent trust. You sign away any claim to the voting shares. You and your mother disappear again, this time with enough money to live comfortably. Grace looked at the paper. You want me to become her. I want you to survive. My mother survived. Richard smiled faintly. Exactly. Grace looked toward Claire again. Claire stood with her hands folded tightly in front of her. Jack remained several feet away from her. Evan was checking his laptop beside Amanda. For the first time, Grace understood that survival had not preserved her family. It had frozen them at the moment of separation. She handed the document back. No. Richard's face remained calm. You should consider the cost. I have. You will regret believing them. Grace stepped closer. I do not believe all of them. Richard's eyes narrowed. I believe the evidence. She returned to the table. Richard took his place at the head. The meeting began at 9:47. A company attorney introduced the proposed sale of Whitmore Global's shipping and energy divisions to a foreign investment group. The attorney described the transaction as essential to market stability. Evan leaned toward Amanda. They are moving all pension-connected liabilities into the sale. Amanda looked at the documents. So the buyer inherits the missing money? No. The buyer inherits empty accounts. The actual funds move through separate holding companies before closing. Richard began the vote. Amanda stood. This board has received formal notice of a contested controlling interest. Any vote taken tonight may be subject to injunction and personal liability. Richard's attorney responded. The claim relies on an unverified trust copy, a privately arranged paternity test, and the appearance of a woman who has been legally dead for 20 years. Amanda placed Nora's statement before the board. The death record was based on falsified dental files. Nora rose from the visitor's chair. I signed the identification. The room quieted. She continued. The dental records were replaced before I examined them. No DNA comparison was performed. The Whitmore family pressured the county to close the case. Richard looked at her. You accepted payment from Miss Reyes. Nora's hands trembled. No. Were you threatened? No. Then why wait 20 years? Nora looked toward Claire. Because I was afraid. Richard leaned back. Fear does not make your memory reliable. Nora's voice grew steadier. No. It made my silence useful to you. Several board members exchanged glances. Richard's attorney moved to strike her statement from the meeting record. Amanda refused to sit. We also have a laboratory report establishing Jack Mercer as Grace Hart's biological father. The attorney took the report. This does not prove Claire is her mother. Claire stood. My medical records before the accident confirm my pregnancy. Richard looked at her. There were no such records. I had a blood test 3 days before I disappeared. Evan turned his laptop toward the board. The clinic archived billing information under Claire Mercer's insurance policy. Richard's legal department requested the record 2 weeks after the accident. The room changed. A board member named Susan Keller leaned forward. Why would the company request a pregnancy test after Claire's death? Richard answered before Evan could. Routine estate review. Evan displayed another file. The request was marked urgent and signed by Richard Whitmore. Richard's attorney stood. These records were obtained illegally. Evan closed the laptop halfway. Then you are not disputing their authenticity. Richard looked at him with open hostility. Evan held his gaze. The wall clock moved past 10:30. Amanda presented the trust copy. Richard's lawyers challenged every page. They questioned the witnesses, the date, the notary seal, and Claire's signature. One attorney argued that even if Grace was Claire's daughter, she had been born under a false name and had no legal connection to the Whitmore estate. Another claimed Claire's use of false identities constituted fraud that voided the trust. Amanda answered each challenge, but without the original document, the board remained divided. Jack watched Richard control the room through patience. He did not shout. He did not threaten anyone openly. He allowed his lawyers to create doubt one sentence at a time. At 11:15, Richard called for the vote to proceed. Amanda objected. Susan Keller requested a 30-minute delay. Richard refused. The market opens in Asia within the hour. Any delay could damage the transaction. A board member near the far end spoke. Richard, if the trust is authentic, you do not have authority to close the sale after midnight. Richard looked at him. If the trust is authentic, which it is not. Grace looked at the clock. 45 minutes remained. Evan sent another message to Peter Lang. No response. He called. The phone rang inside the room. Everyone turned. A dark leather case sat beneath an empty chair near the wall. The phone rang again from inside it. Evan stood. That is Peter's bag. Richard's face changed. Security moved toward the chair. Before they reached it, the boardroom doors opened. Peter Lang entered. His white shirt was wrinkled. His tie hung loose around his neck. He carried a smaller document case in one hand. Richard stood. "Where have you been?" Peter closed the doors behind him, deciding whether I could live with myself. Richard's attorney approached. "You are not authorized to attend this session." Peter looked around the table. "I have served as chief financial officer of this company for 19 years. Richard's voice hardened. "You are suspended." Peter nodded. "I expected that." Richard looked toward security. "Remove him." Peter raised the document case. "If I leave this room, the federal agents downstairs come up without me." No one moved. Richard stared at him. "What have you done?" Peter walked toward the table. "What I should have done 10 years ago." He placed the case before Grace. Richard said, "Do not open that." Grace looked at him. Then she released the locks. Inside lay a thick document bound with blue ribbon. The original Charles Whitmore Family Voting Trust. Claire touched the edge of the first page. Her father's signature appeared at the bottom. Amanda examined the seals. "They are intact." Richard's attorney took a step forward. Peter blocked him. "Owen Pike asked me to remove the trust from the safety deposit box. He believed Richard had gained access to the bank." Richard looked toward the board. "He is lying to save himself." Peter nodded. "I am trying to save myself. That does not make him innocent." He opened another section of the case. Inside were ledgers, account records, and encrypted drives. I authorized transfers I knew were improper. I signed reports that concealed pension losses. Every time I objected, Richard reminded me that my name appeared on the documents. Peter looked toward the portrait of Charles Whitmore. "I told myself I was protecting the company." His voice weakened. "I was protecting my position." Richard remained standing. "You stole the trust. I safeguarded it. For 10 years. Owen believed you killed the woman in Claire's car." Silence fell across the boardroom. Claire gripped the table. Richard's face went still. Peter removed a folder containing Rachel Mason's employment records. Rachel discovered the shell accounts before Claire did. She copied transaction logs and contacted Owen. Evan opened the file. Peter continued. 2 days later, Rachel disappeared. Owen believed Richard's security team used her body to complete Claire's staged death. Claire looked at Richard. "Did you kill her?" Richard did not answer. Peter placed a small recorder on the table. "This contains a conversation from 12 years ago." He pressed play. Richard's younger voice filled the room. "Rachel Mason is not a problem anymore. The records are. Find every copy before the trust becomes active." The recording ended. A board member stood and moved away from Richard. Another reached for his phone. Richard's attorney whispered to him. Richard ignored the advice. He pointed toward Peter. "You signed every transfer." "Yes. You built the financial structure. Under your direction. You will go to prison." Peter looked exhausted. "I know." The simple answer deprived Richard of his leverage. At 11:48, Amanda spread the original trust across the table. The notary seals matched archived records. The witness signatures were verified. The language was clear. Upon the 21st birthday of Claire Whitmore's biological child, temporary stewardship of the voting shares would terminate. Control would pass immediately to the heir, as the independent audit would begin. Richard looked toward the clock. 12 minutes remained. He called for an immediate vote on the sale. Susan Keller objected. Richard struck the table with his palm. "I remain chairman until midnight." Grace looked at him. "For 12 minutes. That is enough." He began calling names. 2 board members voted in favor. 1 voted against. Another abstained. The vote moved around the table. Jack stood behind Grace. She looked up at him. "What if they finish before midnight?" Amanda answered. "The sale could close. What happens to the employees?" Evan looked at the pension records. "Most of them lose everything." Grace looked at Claire. "What would grandfather have wanted?" Claire shook her head. I spent most of my life trying not to become what he wanted. Grace turned toward Jack. What would you choose? Jack looked at the trust, the ledgers, and the rows of names belonging to employees he would never meet. I thought of the years he had worked through exhaustion to keep his own home. He thought of men and women who had done the same while Richard treated their retirement as money without faces. It is your name on that trust, Jack said. That is not what I asked. Jack moved closer. I spent 20 years fixing things with my hands because machines make sense. You replace what is broken. You rebuild what is worn. People are not that simple. Grace waited. Jack looked toward Richard. But you know what he did. You know who pays if everyone stays silent. The vote reached Susan Keller. She looked at Richard, then at Grace. I vote against the sale. The count remained tied. Richard held the chairman's deciding vote. He smiled. As acting steward, I approve the transaction. The company attorney placed the final authorization before him. The clock showed 11:59. Richard reached for the pen. Grace placed her hand on the trust. The second hand moved. Jack could hear the rain against the windows. Claire stood beside Evan. Peter closed his eyes. Midnight arrived. The board secretary's computer sounded a soft alert. The company attorney looked at the trust, then at the clock. Richard signed the page. The attorney did not take it. Your authority has expired. Richard stared at him. I signed before the transfer was processed. The trust terminates stewardship upon the heir's 21st birthday. The processing time is administrative. Richard turned toward the board secretary. Complete the sale. She looked at Grace. Grace stood slowly. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was clear. As controlling shareholder, I reject the transaction. Richard stepped toward her. You have no idea what you are doing. Grace did not move. My first vote is to suspend Richard Whitmore from all company authority. Susan Keller seconded the motion. The board approved it. Richard looked around the room. Men and women who had obeyed him for years would no longer meet his eyes. Grace continued. My second decision is to open every corporate account, pension record, shell company, and internal communication to federal investigators. The boardroom doors opened. The two federal agents entered with additional officers behind them. Richard turned toward Claire. His control finally broke. You destroyed this family. Claire looked at the man who had controlled her fear for half her life. No. Her voice remained quiet. You taught us what silence costs. The agents approached Richard. He did not resist, but his eyes remained fixed on Grace as they escorted him from the room. Peter followed voluntarily. Before leaving, he placed the recording and ledgers into an evidence bag. Nora sat down as if her legs could no longer support her. Amanda gathered the trust documents. Evan closed his laptop. The boardroom slowly emptied. Dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Grace stood at the window overlooking Seattle. Jack approached but did not touch her. After a moment, she said, The test says you are my father. He nodded. But I do not know what that is supposed to feel like. Neither do I. She looked at him. That is not very reassuring. Jack gave a tired smile. It is honest. Grace looked through the glass at the city below. Claire remained near the board table, uncertain whether she belonged beside them. Evan stood several feet away from her. Jack looked at Claire. They had exposed the truth, but the years between them remained. We won the truth, he said. That does not mean we get the time back. Claire nodded. I know. Jack turned toward the pale line of morning above the water. But morning is still coming. Jack's words remained between them as the first light moved across the windows of Whitmore Tower. Below, Seattle was beginning to wake. Ferries crossed the gray water. Office lights appeared one floor at a time. Traffic gathered on wet streets. Inside the boardroom, the night had left everything out of place. Documents covered the table. Coffee sat untouched in porcelain cups. Richard's chair remained pulled back empty for the first time in years. Grace stood beside the window with one hand against the glass. 24 hours earlier, she had been Grace Hart, a college student who owned 2 suitcases and a collection of false addresses. Now her name controlled a corporation. She did not feel powerful. She felt tired. Claire approached slowly. "Happy birthday." Grace did not turn. "I forgot. I never did." Grace looked at her mother then. There were no candles, no small apartment decorated after midnight, no cake purchased under a false name, only a boardroom full of evidence and a city that had no idea her life had changed. Claire held out a small silver box. Grace hesitated before accepting it. Inside was a thin necklace with a single piece of blue sea glass. "I found it in Maine when you were 6, Claire said. "You said it looked like a piece of the sky." Grace touched the glass. "You kept it all this time. I kept everything I could carry." The answer held too much history. Grace closed the box. "Thank you." It was not forgiveness. Claire understood. Jack watched them from across the room. Evan stood beside Amanda, signing a statement for the federal agents. He looked older than he had the day before, as though the truth had added years rather than removing them. When he finished, Claire moved toward him. "Evan." He looked up. She stopped several feet away. "I do not expect anything from you. That makes one of us." Claire accepted the words. Evan looked toward Grace. "She needs someone who understands the financial records." "I know. I will stay until the investigation is stable." Claire nodded. "Thank you. I am not staying for you. I know that too." He gathered his laptop and walked past her. At the door he stopped. Without turning, he said, "The letter from my 10th birthday." Claire held her breath. What did it say? She looked at the box of intercepted letters. "That I remembered the way you used to line up your toy cars by color. That I wondered if you still hated peas. That I hoped your father had remembered to buy you a cake." Evan remained still. "He did." Claire's voice weakened. "What kind chocolate? That was your favorite." "It still is." He left the boardroom before she could answer. Claire looked down at her hands. Jack walked toward her. She asked, "Did I make that worse?" "No." "Did I make it better? I do not know." Claire nodded. Jack added, "He asked." That was enough to keep her standing. The legal consequences began before the family left the building. Richard was charged first with fraud, document forgery, obstruction, and witness intimidation. Additional charges followed as investigators opened the corporate records. The name Rachel Mason appeared again and again. She had worked as a junior accountant for one of the companies Richard used to move pension money. Her notes showed that she discovered transfers no employee at her level was supposed to see. 2 days after she contacted Owen Pike, she disappeared. The body recovered from Alder Lake matched the old fracture in Rachel's wrist. DNA from preserved evidence confirmed her identity. Jack learned the result in Amanda's office. Claire sat beside him. Grace stood near the window. Evan closed the report. For several moments, no one spoke. Rachel had become a body in someone else's grave. Her family had spent 20 years believing she had simply walked away. Claire covered her mouth. "She died because I needed Richard to believe I was dead." Jack looked at her. "You did not put her in that car, but I lived because she did not." Grace moved toward her mother. Claire stepped back. "I knew there was a body. Owen told me not to ask who it was." Her voice shook. "I agreed not to ask." Evan looked at the report again. "That is something you will have to answer for." Claire nodded. "Yes." She cooperated with investigators. She gave them every false name, every address, and every document Owen had provided. She testified about the staged accident and the records she carried into hiding. Her legal identity was restored during a closed court hearing. The judge asked her to state her name for the record. Claire stood. For a moment she could not speak. She had lived as Rebecca Hale, Laura Bennett, Ann Porter, and Claire Hart. Names chosen for survival. Names that disappeared whenever someone looked too closely. Finally, she said, Claire Elizabeth Whitmore Mercer. Jack sat behind her. He did not correct the surname. He did not claim it either. The court acknowledged that Claire acted under threat, but her decisions were not erased. She received limited protection in exchange for testimony and continued cooperation. Peter Lang accepted responsibility for the transfers he authorized. His cooperation reduced his sentence but did not remove it. Dr. Nora Bell testified before a grand jury. Her statement reopened questions about corruption inside the county medical examiner's office. Richard's network began collapsing one person at a time. Former employees offered records. Attorneys surrendered messages. Board members who once defended him discovered their loyalty had limits when prison became possible. Whitmore Global entered independent oversight. Grace attended her first official meeting by video from Amanda's office. The screen displayed executives who had known her name only as a threat. Grace wore a plain sweater and kept her hair tied back. A man from the restructuring team asked whether she intended to become chief executive. No. Do you plan to sell your voting interest? No. Then what role do you see for yourself? Grace looked toward Evan, who sat outside the camera's view. She answered, The company restores the pension fund before it pays bonuses, dividends, or retention packages. The executive began explaining liquidity limits. Grace interrupted. The employees did not create those limits. The room went quiet. She continued, Sell corporate property. Cancel executive contracts. Recover funds from the shell companies. Start with every benefit Richard approved for himself. Evan looked down to hide a smile. The company sold 2 private aircraft, a coastal estate, and several investment properties. It was not enough to restore everything at once. But payments began. Retired employees received letters explaining what had been recovered. Some called Amanda's office to thank Grace. Others were angry that it had taken so long. Grace listened to both. She returned to college for the spring semester. She kept the name Grace Hart on her student records. When a reporter asked why she did not use Whitmore, she answered, A last name is not the same thing as an identity. Claire refused every corporate position offered to her. She rented a small apartment in Cedar Falls near the river. The place had 1-bedroom narrow windows and kitchen cabinets painted yellow by the previous tenant. She chose it because no one had chosen it for her. On her first night there, she placed her suitcase in the closet, not beneath the bed. She left it empty. Mercer Classic Motors reopened 6 weeks after Richard's arrest. The first morning, Jack raised the garage door before sunrise. Cool air entered the building. The spaces once left empty by frightened customers began filling again. Some returned because they believed Jack. Some returned because the news had made him famous. Jack treated them the same. A fresh sign hung above the entrance. Mercer Classic Motors. The lettering was simple and dark blue. Grace stood outside beside him. You could have changed the name. To what? Something expensive. I do not fix expensive. I fix broken. She smiled. Inside the storage building, Richard's message remained on the wall. Dead women should remain dead. Jack opened a can of white paint. Grace picked up a roller. They worked without speaking. The black words disappeared beneath the first coat, but shadows remained. Jack added another. Grace watched the letters fade. Does painting over it make it gone? Jack dipped the roller again. No. Then why do it? He handed her the paint tray. Because it is my wall. Grace considered that. Then she continued painting. By noon, the message was invisible. Claire came to the garage 3 days later. She carried 2 coffees. Jack was beneath the Mustang when her shoes appeared beside him. You still take it black, she said. He slid out. You remembered. I remember too much. Jack accepted the cup. Claire looked around the garage. Several things had changed. New lifts, new tools, a photograph of Evan's college graduation near the office. Other things remained. The old radio, the wooden tool chest, the unfinished Mustang. Claire touched the workbench. "May I stay for a while?" Jack looked at her. "You do not need permission to stand in a garage." "I think I do." He took a drink of coffee. "You can stay." She came back the following week. Then again. At first, she visited only during business hours. She sat in the office and helped Amanda organize records connected to the investigation. Jack worked in the main bay. They spoke about practical things: invoices, court dates, Grace's classes, Evan's schedule. They avoided the marriage that still existed in memory and nowhere else. One evening, Claire remained after the employees left. Rain tapped gently against the open bay doors. Jack was cleaning tools. Claire stood beside the old wooden chest. "You kept it. You made it. The drawers never fit. They still do not." She smiled. The smile reached him before he could stop it. For 1 second, the years between them thinned. Then Jack looked away. Claire asked, "Do you still consider yourself married?" He stopped wiping the wrench in his hand. The question had been waiting since the station. Jack walked into the office and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay his wedding ring. The metal had dulled, but the shape remained. He picked it up. "Our marriage ended at Alder Lake." Claire lowered her eyes. Jack continued, "I just did not know it had ended. I am sorry. I know." He placed the ring on the desk. Claire looked at it. "Is there any part of you that wants it back?" Jack leaned against the chair. "There is a part of me that wants to wake up 20 years ago. Evan is asleep down the hall. You are in the kitchen. None of this has happened." Claire's eyes filled. "But that man does not exist anymore," Jack said. "Neither does the woman he married." Claire wiped beneath one eye. "I do not know who I am without running. Then find out. And if you do not like who I became," Jack looked at her, "then at least I will be deciding with the truth." Claire nodded slowly. She picked up her coffee. At the office door, Jack spoke again. "Dinner on Friday." She turned. "What dinner?" "Not here." Claire looked uncertain. "Is that a date?" "It is food in the same place at the same time." "That sounds almost romantic." "Do not make me cancel." She smiled. Friday became another Friday. They did not resume their marriage. They began something new. Claire learned that Jack no longer liked crowded restaurants. Jack learned that Claire could not sleep unless she knew where every exit was. They argued about the past. Sometimes Claire left angry. Sometimes Jack said things that were true but cruel. They returned. No one disappeared. Evan met Claire once a month at a small cafe near Portland. Their first conversations felt like interviews. He asked where she lived when he turned 5. Montana. Where was she when he broke his arm? Minnesota. Did she know he went to college? Yes. How Owen had sent a photograph of Jack helping him carry boxes into the dorm. Evan's face hardened. Claire did not look away. Months passed. One afternoon she arrived late. Evan was already sitting at the table. "You came early," she said. "I was nearby." She knew it was not true. She sat across from him. A server approached. Evan ordered 2 coffees. He remembered how she took hers. Claire noticed but did not mention it. The birthday card came later. She mailed it to his real address. Evan left it unopened for 3 days. Then he read it twice. At the next meeting, he placed it on the table. "You wrote that you remember my first birthday." Claire nodded. "You put cake in your hair. Dad has a picture." "I know." Evan looked at her. "You always know because someone sent you pictures." "Yes." "That still makes me angry." "It should." He folded the card. "I am trying to figure out what to do with both things. What things that you left." Claire waited. "And that you loved me." Her breath caught. Evan looked toward the window. He was not ready to call her mom. But when they left the cafe, he allowed her to hug him. Only briefly. Only once. Grace spent her summer break in Cedar Falls. She began working at the garage because Jack refused to give her money without a job. On her first day, she dropped a tray of bolts across the floor. On her second, she mislabeled 3 boxes of parts. On her third, she arrived wearing expensive shoes Richard's attorneys had returned from a family storage account. Jack looked at them. "Those will not survive. They are waterproof. They are not engine-proof." By noon, grease covered the leather. Grace stared at the stain. Jack handed her a rag. "Now they belong here." She laughed. He taught her how to listen to an engine. They stood beside the Mustang while it idled unevenly. "Do not look at the gauges," Jack said. "What am I listening for? It will tell you. Cars do not talk. People say that because they are impatient." Grace closed her eyes. The engine turned. A faint, irregular knock sounded beneath the deeper rhythm. "There," she said. Jack watched her. "What something is wrong near the left side." He switched off the engine. "Your brother heard the same thing when he was 12. Grace opened her eyes. "He did exact same sound." She smiled. Evan visited the following weekend. Grace told him the story 3 times. He claimed Jack had exaggerated. Jack produced an old repair notebook with Evan's handwritten diagnosis. Grace laughed until Evan tried to take it from her. For the first time, Jack watched his children argue about something ordinary. Not death, not money, not Claire. A notebook. Claire stood in the doorway carrying dinner. Evan looked at her. "You ordered the noodles from the wrong place." Claire stopped. "You said you liked these. When I was 7. They were the only ones you ate. I have changed." Claire smiled carefully. "I am learning that." They ate at the workbench. The conversation was uneven. Sometimes silence appeared, but silence no longer meant someone was leaving. By autumn, the Mustang was nearly finished. Jack and Grace installed the final pieces together. Claire polished the dashboard. Evan reviewed the restoration receipts and complained that Jack ignored every budget he had created. On a quiet afternoon, sunlight entered through the open bay doors. The Mustang stood in the center of the garage, deep blue paint reflecting the room around it. Claire rested one hand on the hood. "You finished it." Jack stood beside Grace. "We finished it." Claire looked at him. The word included more than the car. She understood. Later, after Claire and Evan went to collect dinner, Grace remained beside Jack. An old country song played softly on the radio. She sat in the driver's seat and adjusted the rearview mirror. Jack's reflection appeared behind her. Their gray eyes met in the glass. "Jack." He looked up from the tools. "Yes." Grace opened her mouth, then stopped. She looked down at the steering wheel. For months, she had used his name because Father felt too formal and Dad felt too intimate. Jack waited. Grace looked into the mirror again. "Dad." The wrench slipped slightly in his hand. He set it on the workbench. Grace turned in the seat. Her confidence disappeared. Was that too soon? Jack wiped his hands slowly on an old shop rag. The cloth had belonged to his father. Then it had belonged to him. Now grease from the car he rebuilt with his daughter darkened its edges. "No," he said. His voice nearly failed. "No, sweetheart. It was 21 years late." Grace laughed through sudden tears. Jack opened his arms. She crossed the space between them. He held the daughter he had lost before he knew she existed. He did not think about the trust the company or the years stolen from them. He felt the weight of her head against his shoulder. He felt her breathe. That was enough. Claire and Evan appeared in the garage doorway. They stopped when they saw Jack and Grace. Claire covered her mouth. Evan looked toward her. For a moment he seemed ready to make a joke. Instead, he lifted the paper bag in his hand. "You ordered the wrong noodles again, Mom." Claire froze. Evan walked past her and placed the food on the workbench. The word remained in the room. "Mom." Claire's eyes filled. She did not ask him to repeat it. Jack looked at her over Grace's shoulder. Nothing had been erased. Rachel Mason was still dead. Evan's childhood was still gone. Grace had still grown up without a father. Jack had still spent 20 years beside an empty grave. But the garage was full. That evening, they opened the bay doors and pushed the Mustang outside. The road was wet from a passing storm. Jack sat behind the wheel. Grace climbed into the passenger seat. Claire and Evan took the back. Jack turned the key. The engine came alive with a deep, steady rhythm. Grace listened carefully. No knock. Jack smiled. No knock. He drove out of Mercer Classic Motors and onto the road that led beyond Cedar Falls. In the mirror, Jack saw Claire beside Evan. Ahead, Grace rested one hand against the open window as the last rainwater lifted from the pavement. For 20 years, Jack Mercer had believed love was something buried beneath the black water of Alder Lake. He had been wrong. Love had not returned untouched. It had returned older, wounded, and afraid. But it was alive. And for the first time in 20 years, everyone Jack loved was moving in the same direction.